Hello, Logik friends. My name is Andy Milkis. I'm a flame artist and co-founder of Logik.tv. Welcome to this Logik Academy course on beauty techniques in Flame, sponsored by Autodesk. In this course, I'm going to take you through a typical beauty cleanup shot and demonstrate techniques for blemish removal, fixing blotchy areas, cleaning up red eyes and dark circles under the eye, and overall texture and color balancing, all with an emphasis on working efficiently. Beauty work is like a chili recipe. Everyone has a recipe that they love, and everyone thinks that theirs is the best. That's another way of saying that there's no right or wrong way to do beauty work. My hope is that you'll find something useful in this demonstration that will improve your recipe, because who doesn't love chili, right? Very few people look good in HD, and no one looks good in 4K. That's the foundation of my approach to beauty work, pun intended. That frame of mind helps me focus on making the people I work on look their best, as opposed to looking like something that they are not. And finally, remember that the golden rule for beauty cleanup is the same as the rule for putting on makeup. It shouldn't look like you're wearing makeup. Keep it subtle and natural. You can use the link in the YouTube description to download the Flame archive and footage if you'd like to follow along. For reference, I'm using Flame 2022.2 on a 2019 MacBook Pro with the 2.3 GHz 8-core i9 processor, 64 gigs of RAM, a Radeon Pro 5600M GPU with 8 gigs of texture memory, and just the internal SSD for storage. Let's get started. All right, so let's take a look. The first thing I like to do whenever I approach a beauty shot is to look at the clip. And I look at it for two reasons. I look at it for technical reasons, and then I look at it for aesthetic reasons. All right? Technical reasons, or a technical analysis, let's look at the clip. It's a close-up. It's handheld, so the camera's moving. Also, her face is moving. This is kind of informing me as to, what kind of work I might need to do, what I might need to track or stabilize. I can also look and see that the focus is falling off over here, but it isn't really that big of a deal because it's not affecting her skin that much, so I don't have to worry about that. One thing that's really standing out, and I'm going to zoom in to just make sure everyone can see this is really noisy footage, really grainy footage, so I'm going to have to definitely run this through neat video. So now let's look at this from an aesthetic point of view. And, again, I don't mean to sound critical, but I'm being asked to retouch this, so I'm going to look at this with a retoucher's eye. It looks to me like this woman here has been outside for a while. Maybe it's cold. She has blotches of red on her face, like her nose is red, her cheeks are red, which is kind of typical for someone who's been outside in the cold. It also looks like her makeup is starting to wear off a little bit. There's a blotch here on her skin where you can see that the foundation that she had on is kind of coming off. If we look under her eye here, we can see some flakes where the mascara or the eye makeup has started to come off and leave little clumps or flakes here under the eye. Globally, she's good skin. There's a lot of texture on her cheeks here that we may want to bring down a little bit. Again, that could be because of the cold. That her pores are kind of being emphasized. So we'll take a look at that. There are a few marks. There's a scar here under her nose. She has some laugh lines. We never want to get rid of laugh lines completely. We just want to take them down a little bit. So we'll do that. And there are a couple of pimples here and here. She has some beauty marks or freckles that we'll leave. But if we look at it, we can see there are a couple of blemishes that we'll get rid of. She has a little mark on her lip here as well, a little bump. We'll take care of that. Her eyes are slightly bloodshot, so we'll take a look at a technique for cleaning up redness in the eyes. We'll clean up the mascara flakes that have fallen, and we'll brighten up the under eyes a bit. I'll show you a great technique for that. We're going to do some eyebrow work. If you look here, this eyebrow has a couple of stray eyebrow hairs. There's a couple of gaps. Same thing on this side. There's a couple of gaps. There's a little white mark or something inside here, so we'll take care of that. And then finally, we'll look at, she has a little bump in her nose. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with it, but sometimes in the course of doing retouch, we're asked to clean up bumps in the nose. So I'm going to show you a technique for that as well. All right, let's set up this batch group. We have all batch groups by default are 100 frames long. Our clip is 60 frames long, so if I hold down the T key and double tap on the clip, my batch group changes its duration to match the clip. I'm then going to grab a render node and connect that. And that's the basis of a batch group. I have a little Python script that goes ahead and creates a generic setup for me. Boom, there you go. And this is kind of the base setup that I always seem to use for any kind of VFX shot, beauty included. I can throw this up on the portal, possibly. It just requires neat video. But it's a great example of how Python scripting can speed up your workflow. But let's take a look here, okay? I have my base clip, which feeds into a mux, and it's got a context point here, so I can always see my before by just going into context 1. I have 2 branches here. One is to a paint node with a freeze, which gives me an area to mark up, like to make red pen notes and things like that, areas I want to clean up. And the other is a branch to a neat video node and a pre-comp render node for my denoise clip. There's a mux node to connect the denoise clip to, and then a comp node set to subtract and add that will keep the grain in its own separate channel. It'll subtract the grain or the noise from the clip and then add it back on at the end. And then there's a difference node at the end there set to a mux so we can compare the grain at the beginning and the end and make sure that they're identical. It's always good to make yourself some notes. I know that this can look a little shocking. It's always good to have a reference of the things that you need to get rid of or the work that you need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and make some notes for myself. So I've got this blotchy area here. I'll mark that in red. I always like to use different colors here just to help break up the work into different categories. So red might be the blotch that I want to get rid of, but green will denote the blemishes or the pimples that I want to get rid of or that I think we need to get rid of. Or maybe just things I need to patch out. We'll definitely get into that. I need to clean up all this little stuff here. Okay, there's a little white thing there. I'll go and also hit the little bump in her lip, this pimple here. Let's go ahead and get a third color going. And this is where I'm going to go and take care of these laugh lines. Okay, I'm also going to go ahead and lighten up the bags under her eyes. Right? We'll fill in the holes here and the eyebrow. And then, I'll just go back to the green ones here and get rid of, just to notate that I want to take care of the redness in the eyes. Okay, that's my work cut out for me. And I also have that set, I have a context set for that for context 3. So with context 1, I can look at my original, and context 3, I can look at my notes. 1 is the original, 2 is the result, 3 is the notes. Everything's right where you need it to be. You barely have to move your hand. It makes it very efficient. Okay, step 1 is to run neat video on this footage. Like I said, it's really noisy footage. So let's take a look at that. We did a great Logic Live with Tim from Neat Video, where he dove deep and showed how Neat Video works and how to get the best result. One of the things he showed is to pick an area that's kind of dark and consistent. So if I'm going to pick this area here and do a build profile, all right, and we'll apply that. And now if I zoom in and show you F1 is before and F4 is the result, that's not bad. Okay, not bad at all. Oh, look at that. When I got rid of the grain, Neat Video is an amazing tool. When I got rid of the grain, I saw that there's a little speck of something here, so we'll add that to the pile. Oh, and there's a little dot there too that looks like it might have been on the sensor or something. Let's look, F1. Yeah, there's a little problem with the sensor, so we'll get rid of that too. Let me go back to my red pen notes and make a note of that. Green, yep, we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to get rid of that. So let's render out our neat video. Again, my little setup here creates automatically a render node that's pointed to the reel called precomps. So my neat video render is going to go right into precomps. I'm running on a MacBook Pro, and this is 4K footage, so this is going to take a little while. So I'm going to hit render, and I'll hit the fast forward button right now. Okay, and my neat video clip is rendered. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off this the rendering on this render node here. Actually, I have believe it or not, I have a Python script for that, and it's mapped to a hotkey. So if I just hit this hotkey combination, then boom, I've disabled the render. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect this here, connect my denoise to this mux, and just check All right, so here's my denoised clip, and if I hit context 2, I've got the original grain back on top. So there's the original. I know you're not going to see anything, but context 1 and context 2, you can hear the clanging of my mechanical keyboard. I am putting the original noise back on top. Okay, let's get started. The first thing we should do before any beauty work begins is think about efficiency. This is a 4K image here. And if I look at it, almost half the image is blank, meaning like almost half the image contains pixels that I don't need to work on. So I'm just going to cut those out, or really crop those out, which will give me a smaller canvas to work on. That'll make everything go faster. I do this on every shot. So I'm going to grab a resize node here and hit F1 to look at the source. Change my bounding box properties here to free. And then I'm going to take my little bounding box here and just drag it to the left. You can see the numbers under width plummeting. So I've got a width now of 2402. It's a nice round number. And let me just scrub through and make sure that her face never reaches that bounding box. And it doesn't, so we're good. And finally, under destination here, I'm going to hit crop lock output, and that will set my resize node to match the bounding box. So I've gone from an image that was 4,096 pixels wide to one that's 2,400 pixels wide. And that's a savings of almost half. So before I do anything else now that I've created this like region of interest, I'm going to put everything back where it needs to be here. I'm going to change this from main composite to repo. All right, and I will add an image. Oh, I'm sorry, add an action layer and connect this to here. If I go back to the resize, I can see there's a position value of negative 847.24. Okay, so if I go here into action and look at my cropped image over top of the background, let me make 2 windows here. If I go ahead into axis and do negative 847.24, all right, this is back where it needs to be. So now I think I can safely say that we're good to go to begin our beauty work. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is some blemish removal, right? I'm going to look at F3 here and look at the little green blemishes that I circled. Typically, the way to get rid of blemishes is through a technique called patching, and all that really means is borrowing skin from somewhere nearby to cover over the piece that you don't want. I'm going to show you 2 different techniques for patching, all right? And like I said at the top, beauty work is like a chili recipe. Everybody's got their own, and there's no wrong way to do it. I'm going to show you the way I used to do patching and then the way I do it now, and I'll explain to you why I made the jump. So typically what you do for patching is you'd go into the GMass tracer, zoom in on a blemish. Let's start with this one, shall we? I'm going to press Alt-G on the keyboard to create an ellipse, a GMask ellipse. Add a little bit of softness to it. That's A on the keyboard to go into add mode, and then shift and drag out from the edge to create this little gradient of softness. And now I need to track that GMask to that blemish. So I'm just going to go into tracking. I'm going to use the old-fashioned point tracker. It's already where it needs to be. We'll hit analyze. And 60 frames later, I say in 60 frames later, we have a track. It's a beautiful thing. I'm going to go and add an action node here. And for anybody who doesn't know, if you hold down Shift and drag the node across a line, it'll make the connections automatically. Press Control N to get a new layer. And I'll connect the front to my resize node and the matte to my GMass tracer. And now I have seemingly nothing. Okay? It's not true. I have, if I turn the background off, I have a little patch of skin right there. And what I need to do is offset the footage that's inside that little hole, or inside that mask that I drew. And there are a couple ways to do that. I can go into my node bin here and grab a source front if I want to for that layer. And take the axis of the source front. And you can see it on either side here, and then move it up or down. I like to move the skin up or down, and try to find an area where the texture and the color and everything matches. Typically, you have to go diagonal. Not typically. With the human face, especially when you have light falling off, sometimes what works best is to go down and then maybe to the left a little bit or to the right a little bit. And you'll get something that kind of matches. Then you can go in to the blur here on the matte input of your layer. I'm holding down Alt and just dragging that to the right a little bit and softening that matte. If I go too far, you'll see the pimple comes back. But just a little bit helps blend the edges together. And as you can see, the blemish is magically gone. Okay? That's one way to do it. I'm going to get rid of the source front. I find that these tend to slow down your system a little bit the more you have or the more you add. And the patching or the blemish removal tends to pile up quickly. But another way to do that is to right-click on your layer here, on your surface rather, and go to Add Matchbox, and pick from your Matchbox list Front Matte Offset. It gives you the same functionality as that front source, but with a lot less overhead because it's a matchbox. And matchboxes are GPU accelerated. They just exist here. So here are the controls for front matte offset. They allow you to move the front matte together or the front and matte separately, all within one node here. So I'm going to go into front offset and then move the footage inside the little window. Same thing, I'll go down and to the right a little bit. And of course, I'm going to have to also go and, oh, well, it's already set, blur the matte. And the pimple's gone. Okay. Another way to add one of these front matte offsets is you can go into the Matchbox tab here on the node bin, press F on the keyboard to filter these into just the ones that begin with F, and then you can attach the node like that. Might be a little quicker for you. Okay, and this totally works, but I'll show you what I've done differently, or how I've evolved my workflow over time. And that is, I now do my GMask tracing and my patching and everything all within Action. Otherwise, I think we've marked up, let's look at our red pen notes. We've marked up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and if you count these, 17, 18, 19, so 20 different things that we're going to want to patch away. And what that would mean is 20 GMask tracer nodes, or maybe just one with 20 outputs, but 20 different input layers, and all of a sudden you got a big mess. Not only do you have a big mess, you have a lot of connections you need to reconnect if all of a sudden your footage changes, all kinds of things like that. So I've moved on to a technique where I do all of this work just inside Action. And I'll show you how it's done, and I'll show you a great side benefit for that. So let me go ahead and just add an action node here. So I've got my action node. Same kind of technique in that I'm going to do Alt-Space-G to create the G-mask. All right, and there it is. I'll click on the axis. This is just like I did in the G-mask tracer. Go into the tracker and track it. But now what I'm going to do is go into the node bin and just grab an image of the background. I'm going to press Alt-G on the keyboard to connect the G-mask to this node here, to this image here. So it's isolated to this image, and invert the G-mask. Okay, and now what I can do is use the axis of this surface as the front matte offset, so to speak. So I'm going to hide all the other icons by pressing I, and now with my hand I can drag and move this image around and find the sweet spot. I love this technique because it lets me do that gesturally by grabbing the axis, but it also leaves the axis exposed, which means if I needed to, I could reposition it. I could reposition the center. It leaves the controls visible, and I kind of like that. Also, I can go on a mask by mask basis and just blur the mask a little bit to create that little bit of softness on the mask. This is what I was using the layer blur for. I found this technique to be really efficient. I mean, just super fast and just very easy to kind of rinse and repeat. If I want to go ahead and pick another blemish to clean up, from a one-point tracking perspective, there's no perspective change going on. So the tracking data that I have here might work for other blemishes, for other parts of the skin. So I'm just going to take this little cluster here and press Control D to duplicate it. I will now grab the G mask itself and drag it over here to this blemish. And let's see what happens. And because the tracking data is complementary, it almost worked. Okay, there's a slight difference. Let me turn on Auto Key, and I'm just going to move this. I'll center this. Whoops. Over the pimple. Go to the last frame and make a little adjustment. Right, where is it? There it is. Boom. And now in like seconds, I have a second blemish just cleaned up. Right? Want to do it again? Let's do it again. I'll take the original. I'll duplicate it. Bring it over here. Again, this really only works in shots where there's no perspective change. But let's see what happens. Where's another pimple? Oh, here you go. Here's one right here. I'll hide the icons. Now if I scrub through, there's 3 done in a minute. Boom, boom, boom. I love it, I love it, I love it. Oh, you know what? While we're here, let's get rid of this little sensor problem. This I'm going to make a new image for, okay, or a new G mask for, because it's so tiny. Alt-Space-G. Right? You can see this doesn't move. So we just have to be a little bit more selective of our cleanup area. So I'm going to grab this, Alt-G to connect the G mask, double tap on the G mask and invert it. And let me just reset whatever the position values are for this little guy here. And maybe we'll just try going up slightly. And blur that mask, of course. Oh, I think I blurred it too much because it's visible again. There we go. See, we don't want 2 of them. All right, so I think we've gotten rid of that successfully. And then it's really a matter of rinse and repeat for all the other blemishes. So I'll just do it one more time. Let's take a look at this one over here. Right? You want to make sure that you have everything in your schematic unselected or deselected before you draw a new G mask. Otherwise, what's going to happen when you draw a new G mask is it's going to become the child of whatever was selected, and we don't want that. Right? Let's take a look at this one. Same technique, go to tracking. And the fact that we cropped this image down from 4K to 2400 or whatever pixels wide means even this stuff is going to go faster. Everything is going to go faster because we made the image smaller. I'm just going to duplicate this, Alt-G, invert, and reset. I'll turn off Auto Key for now. And let's take a look. I should probably get into the habit of using 2 viewports. So first of all, let's go into View here and turn off the widget display, or switch it rather from all viewports to current viewport only. So now I can zoom in on the face here on this side and kind of use that as my viewer. And the widgets are only going to be visible, you know, on the left side here, which is great. Let's just zoom in. Now I'm going to move a little bit of footage up and down and try to find the sweet spot. There we go. Same thing. I'll blur. Whoops. I'll blur the mask a little bit. Too much and it comes back. Blur the mask a little bit. 30%. And boom, we're clean. All you want to do is repeat this technique for all your blemishes. And before you know it, you'll be done. Alt-Space-G for the spot on the lip. We'll do a 1-point track. Now for the lip, I'm probably going to have to pick an area for the patching from the left side or the right side because that's what's similar. You know, the lip is kind of curved, it's got the shading, it's darker on the bottom, it's got those vertical lines for the little creases in the lip texture. So when I go ahead and duplicate this and connect this with Alt-G, click here, invert, right? Let me just reset the values here, and we'll zoom in over here so we can see. I'm going to want to try going to the right. Oh, I think we have a winner. Look at that. And again, we'll soften the mask a little. Right, and now we're golden. Let's just look at one more of these patches, and that's this little scar next to her nose, just because it requires one additional technique, because we want to preserve this arc here of her nose. I'll show you. So it starts off the same as the others. We Alt-Space-G, we draw a little mask around the scar, we add a little softness, we go into our tracker, analyze forward. All right, I'll grab a new image out here, connect the G mask with Alt-G, invert. Let me just reposition here so we can see what's going on. And now I'm going to go ahead and find that sweet spot here. Do I go up? If I go up, it's too bright. And if I go down, it could be a little too dark. Okay. And it's eating into her nose. So let's go down first, one step at a time. We'll go down. All right. I will blur the mask. Let's look over here. I'll blur the mask. And that helps, right? It really, really helped. In fact, let me just hide and reveal my layer here. And it's pretty convincing, I have to say. We just have to preserve the nose. So here's how we're going to do that. We go back to the axis on our patch mask, because that already has the tracking data. And with that selected, I'm just going to do Space G to draw a new G mask, a freehand one. I'm going to draw a G mask around the contours of the nose. And then I just need to reconnect the G mask exclusivity line here, right? So I'm going to, I have Alt-G, I changed my G mask link rather. I changed my cursor mode to G mask link by Alt-G, disconnect this axis here and reconnect it to our image. And you can see here that the G mask we just drew here is cutting out our patch and preserving that bit of the nose. I'm just going to feather that in a little bit and blur the mask a little. And there you go. Problem solved, right? Now, if you feel like it's a little dark, and I do feel like it's a little dark, I'm going to go here and select my image, go to the Matchbox node bin, press C, and grab a color corrector. Where is it? There it is. Boom. All right, that's going to add a diffuse by default because it needs to. And then let's play with the gamma. And lighten it up ever so slightly. I mean, it's 1.05. If I toggle that G mask or that color correct on and off, you can see it's a subtle effect, but it kind of helps. And there you go. So let's go back and clean up our schematic here a bit. I'm going to get rid of this first little action experiment. And I'm going to call this action Blemishes. And that's basically how you do patching. There are a few more spots here that I called out, like the eyebrows and stuff, or a couple more pimples over here. But it's the same exact technique over and over again. So that should do it for all of our blemishes. And we can always go back and add some more. But I want you to see here, we've got a pretty big action setup. I'm working on a MacBook Pro, and the interactivity is pretty amazing. And that just speaks again to the kind of the advantages you have if you go ahead and crop ahead of time. I'm going to save my batch setup because crashes happen. And now let's look at the laugh line. Again, laugh line is something you don't want to get rid of. You just want to make it less apparent. So I'm going to show you a technique for that. That works for all kinds of wrinkles, especially, lots of times when you're working on someone, especially someone who's older and maybe has more wrinkles in their face, the best approach is not to make the wrinkles go away. It's just to make them less deep, or make them less apparent. I'm going to call this laugh lines. And I'm going to draw a mask around this little laugh line here. Softness. And maybe this one I'll go ahead and planar track. Although I probably could have gotten away with a point track just because of the nature of this footage and how it's moving. Okay, same thing. Let's add our image, connect the Gmask with the link, invert the Gmask, and now I'm going to patch this. And at first it's going to look awful. I'll try patching it first to the left here, maybe to the right a little. Maybe to the right and down a little. Again, at first, it's going to look dreadful. But what I'm going to end up doing is really, really, really heavily blurring the mask. So now if I take my layer and I hide it, see the difference? It just filled in the line a little bit and is very forgiving. I might tighten this up just a slight little bit. Okay, and you can play around with different positions and see what works better. Let's try, here we go, up and to the left. So same thing. Let's blur our mask a lot. That's better. Okay. Well, I'll just hide the image so you can see it. And it's more forgiving. And there is a little bit of that patch kind of peeking in here, but I think we're going to get away with it. Whoops. There we go. We'll zoom back out, full frame. And context 1, context 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Not bad. And that's how you take care of laugh lines. You just repeat the same thing for the other side. The next thing we're going to look at is this blotchy area on the skin. And we're going to fix that with Crok skin. This is really a texture problem. And we need to go in and kind of blur this out and then reintroduce texture back in. Otherwise, we're going to have a super blotchy, smooth area of the face that will just look completely unnatural. And Crok skin is perfect for that. You can find Crok skin in the Logik Matchbox collection, another beautiful gift from our beautiful friend, Ivar. Crok skin, here we go. And Crok skin has all these procedural controls to create the texture of skin. Right? You can play around with roughness, you can add pores, you can add sunspots if you need them. I encourage you to download Crok skin and mess around with it. So let's take a look at our subject's skin here. She certainly does have a lot of pores, but I'm going to rough the skin up just a little bit, give it a little bit more texture, and play around with the bump map values a little bit too. There we go, 0.2. And then let me go ahead and add some pores here. There we go. And I'll up the size. It makes the pattern smaller, but maybe something like that. There we go. We're going to use motion vectors to clean this up, which in this case means making one clean frame and then using motion vectors to track that onto the shot. Maybe while we're in there, we'll also take care of the stuff in the eye, the redness of the eye and these little flakes of mascara. But let's make our clean frame first. We right-click here and use one of my little Python scripts to add a mux node and a freeze. Here's frame 1. All right, so I'll go into my Gmask tracer and I'll make a Gmask for the area in question. Soften that up. And now I'm going to go in and blur that. So we're going to do a little bit of frequency separation here. I'm going to blur this area to get rid of the texture that I don't want and then add texture back in using Crok skin. Oh, important step. Let me T-tap Crok Skin so that it's the same resolution as the comp I'm working on. Okay. And I'm going to add a color correct here and take all the saturation out of the skin. All right, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and add a comp node, and I'm going to comp the Crok Skin on top of my blur node using the same mask, okay, as what's blurring. I guess I could have also connected this to here. There's choice, and I'll just set. Actually, I could put this back into our comp here and just look at context too. So, a couple of things. The first thing I need to do is set my blend mode to overlay, which by default looks terrible. But now I can go into blur here and start blurring what's underneath the Crok Skin. And if I blur this enough, right, it'll get rid of all the stuff that I don't want. Okay, I'm going to go and just make this mask a little bigger, and I'll just blur the mask to the maximum of 200 there. And let me just mix this back a little bit. Actually, I'm going to mix back the old-fashioned way, you know. I'll mix back properly. I'll take the original and mix that back in. Let me just elbow this out so I can stay slightly organized. Mix a little of that back in. There you go, maybe 10%. A couple of things. I'm losing a little bit of the shading here, so I'm going to bring some of that back. And I'm losing the beauty marks that I also want to keep. So let's put those back in. Add another G-mask tracer here. Trace around the beauty marks. Let's get another blend. And we'll comp those in, original over this with the G-mask tracer. Oh, and set the transparency to 0. I'm just going to blur the masks a little bit. Okay. And yeah, I want to bring some of this shading back. So let me go to my blur mat here, and sometimes what you got to do is a second mask. Oops. And we'll set the color to 0. You can see that brings the shading on the nose right back in there. So now we've got our clean skin. Let's go ahead and motion vector that in. Let me move all this down a little. And I'll add another action node here in between. And here's where I'll analyze my motion vectors. I don't need that axis at all. I'll right click on the clip and do an add map motion vectors. And hit analyze. Analysis and cache. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, motion vector caching or motion vector tracking is an amazing tool. It takes a little while to analyze depending on the speed of your system, but basically what it's doing is it's using optical flow to track the movement of every pixel in the image. What it'll allow you to do is track the still frame that you've cleaned up across the entire clip with pixel level accuracy. Let me hit the fast forward button, and we're done. We have our motion vectors cached. What's great is now in Flame, your cached motion vectors appear as a clip with your batch group. It makes them very transportable, and it means you don't have to recache them as often. I think I'll relabel this motion vectors, and I'm going to add my little still frame here, my cleaned up still frame, and I'll pipe in the matte. Let me add an image of layer 1 here. And in order to get the motion vectors to work, I need to do two things. One is I need to make the motion vectors a child. I'm going to hide the background image. The child of my little patch. And then all I need to do is go into the surface here, surface 2, go to tracking and add a reference here at frame 1 because that's where I did all my work. And now the motion vectors will be applied to my patch. See that? So unlike point tracking or planar tracking, motion vector tracking is really good when the image is warping or distorting, like you have oftentimes in the face. And you're done, and it's tracked. While we're here, let's clean up all these little flecks and flakes of mascara. We'll clean up the redness in the eyes, and we'll use the same motion vectors to track it all. I already have a freeze here at frame 1, so let me go and add a paint node. And I'm going to go in here and start cleaning up all this little stuff. Set my brush to recursive clone and paint away. It can sometimes be tricky doing the cloning here, especially when there's shading on the skin. And if you don't pick from the right spot, you'll get an area that's too bright or that's too dark. So sometimes what you have to do is work diagonally like that. Or work with a really light brush like this and just kind of feather it in. Just light brush strokes. I'm doing my best Bob Ross here. Maybe we'll hit the fast forward button again. And sometimes I'll press 2 on the keyboard to get to my second preset. Change my brush type to drag. And then kind of very lightly with this light brush, kind of drag some of this stuff, some of these little darker blotches. I'll drag from below where it's lighter. Okay, if you hit F4 on the keyboard, you'll see the matte that's being created for you here in Paint. Not bad. Let's take care of that while we're here. Maybe that. That was too much. And this while we're here. Okay. Now let's look at the eye. All right, the veins in her eyes aren't really that pronounced, which is a good thing. But let's clean them up. Again, this is one of those things you can't really blur because the eye just gets blurry. So what I like to do is just keep the brush in drag mode and just kind of drag the veins away. This is especially helpful when there's really nothing to clone from. As long as you're delicate with it, you get a pretty good result. Let's check out the other eye. There we go. All that stuff's cleaned up. And like I said, we have a matte. I'm just going to add another mux node here to freeze it. On the other side, add mux node and freeze. It didn't connect because I already have one called freeze 1. And now I am just going to add a little matte edge to the matte output here. And I'm going to negative shrink this. It kind of defaults to 3.3, so I'll just do 4 or something, and I'll hit blur also. And that's just going to give a little bit more coverage. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'm going to add another layer here. Well, I already have layer 2, so I'll extract that out. Add another layer to my motion vector action and connect front matte. And here at frame 1, I just have to pull out image 2. Same thing, I'll make it a child of the motion vectors. We'll just call this cheek, and we'll call this stuff I painted. And I'll go into tracking again on the surface, hit add reference for frame 1, and use the same motion vectors and clean all that stuff up. Brilliant. And just to make it clear, I always do this whenever I paint and use motion vectors. I expand the matte a little bit and blur it a little bit, and that just helps with the blending, especially of little areas. If you have subtle lighting changes going on in your shot, this kind of helps mask those out or hide those. All right, moving right along. Now that we've gone ahead and cleaned up the major blemishes, the bigger pimples, the large area of blotchiness on the cheek, we can go ahead and do a little overall treatment to the skin. And for that, we're going to use A2 Beauty, which is a matchbox. Comes with Flame. If I just drop it in here, you'll see that by default, it affects everything, and we don't want it to affect everything. We're going to create some G masks to control or contain the regions of the face where we want A2 Beauty to do its magic. Here's another little time-saving trick. I'm going to add a G mask tracer node here way back at the beginning. And I'm going to just go to one screen or one viewer for a moment. The reason I'm doing this is because if I set this up and did the tracking at the end of my processing pipe, it's going to take that much longer to track because it has to do all the processing along the way. Typically what I'll do is I'll keep a G mask tracer node all the way at the beginning of my batch schematic and just use it for tracking, but leave it here. That way I get the fastest tracking results that I possibly can. So I've drawn my mask here. I'll set it to planar, analyze forward. And I'm going to make a mask rather for kind of this side of the face, the cheek, this side here, the cheek, and then across the chin. Usually when you do this, you need to break it up. You need to break the mask up just because we are dealing with planes, planar tracking, planes. So if you tried to do all of this in one shape, you might not get as good of a result. So even though this footage doesn't move that much, like in terms of perspective, it's a good practice. So let's go ahead and make a mask for this side now. Okay, and finally we'll do one along the bottom here. We can adjust these later if we need to, but at least this will give us a good starting point. Just going to drop this down here, actually, and then connect the output to A2 Beauty. Add an elbow. For the sake of trying to keep it organized. And we'll go back here to a 2-up view and see what we have. So here's the result of A2 Beauty. And as you can see, it's really good at taking care of the texture that you don't want. It's filling in the pores. It's not dissimilar from the technique we used over here for this patch. This technique, though, does have a tendency to get rid of shaded areas pretty well. So we're going to do a little bit of work to make sure we maintain the shading here in her mouth. And, I'm also going to want to put those beauty marks back on top. I know we did it on that still frame, but let's make sure we keep those intact. Okay, while we're here, let's just look at the controls in A2 Beauty. The first one to look at is size, and this is the size of the area that you're fixing, or the defects rather, that you're fixing. So if I drag this all the way to 0, you see it doesn't really do much. If I drag it up to 250, it hits everything. It's way too much. way too much. The default's at 40 here. You know what? I think we're just going to leave it with the default. Especially if you look on this cheek, it's created a really nice surface. I'm going to try to grab a little bit more of these pores. So let's go back to our G mask here. Actually, let me set a context for A2 Beauty. We'll do it context 4. Okay, so I'm going to try to pull this across, get a few more of the pores that are up by the nose. See that there? I'll pull this back a little just so we get the shading line here preserved. And the same thing over here. Maybe I'll bring this up towards the nose a little bit more just to get some more of those pores cleaned up. Not too close. And 4. Yeah, I want to try to bring a little bit of this back. So what I'm going to do is take the axis for this G mask here, make sure it's selected, and with it selected, I'll add another G mask, space G, put it right here. All right, because I had it selected, this axis selected, the new one is created as a child of the first, so it's going to inherit its tracking data, which certainly helps the cause. Soften this out a little bit. And let's go ahead and change the color of this G mask here. I'll go to matte so we can see it. I'll change the color to 0 and blur it. And we'll zoom in over here so we can see what's going on. Maybe make this a little bigger. If you look, I'll hide and unhide. And this just brings that natural shading back in. If those get blurred, whether by a blur effect or something like A2 Beauty, whenever they get blurred, it kind of is a giveaway that you've done something to that area. I'm going to do the same thing here, or let me just scooch this out a little bit just to protect this little area next to the mouth. All right, we'll go back to A2 Beauty here and look at what we got. Pretty good. All right, again, I want to preserve these little beauty marks. So I'm just going to go back to our G mask node here. Okay, and add another output. You can have multiple outputs, just like in Action here for your G masks. Go back to the one-up view. So this will go faster. Make sure nothing's selected. And then Alt-Space G. And create a circular mask. Do a 1-point track for that. And that tracked pretty well. And what I'll do is I'll take that G mask for that blemish, duplicate it, select the points, move it over top of this beauty mark here. Let's just check the tracking and make sure it's good. It's pretty good. And I just need to shrink this down a little bit, because this beauty mark is smaller. So I'll click on Edit Box. Kind of move that like that. So if we look at our outputs here, I'm going to call the top output for A2 Beauty, and the bottom one Beauty Marks. And I'm just going to go into the schematic, press Alt-E on the keyboard, change my cursor mode to Edit Output, and I'll hide these beauty marks from the A2 Beauty output. So I have two outputs here coming out of the same GMask tracer. So what we're going to do, make ourselves a little bit of room again, is add a comp node. Oh, if you look down here on the GMask tracer, you can see now it's got two outputs, right? For A2 Beauty and then beauty marks. I don't know what I just did. There we go. I guess that was selected. Okay, So we're going to go front here for the MV action node that's before A2 Beauty. Then connect that to the back after the A2 Beauty, and then I'm going to connect this to the Beauty Marks output of my GMask tracer node. Add another elbow, and there we go. We've got our Beauty Marks back in. Looking good. So let's take a look at what's left. Next up, we need to fix the bags under the eyes. We still need to hit the eyebrows. And we want to take care of her nose. It's a little red here. For good measure, let's just call this Beauty Marks. And move on to the bags under the eyes. You know what might be a good idea? While we're here, let's pre-render everything we've already done. This will speed up what we still have to do tremendously. I'll add a render node, and I'll call this pre-comp 1. And I'm just going to make sure it goes into the pre-comps schematic reel, because that's how I roll. Pre-render complete. Let me turn off that guy, make a little more room, and let's look at some eye bags, shall we? It's very tempting when you see these dark circles under the eyes to just brighten them up, to just color correct them, but that rarely works. And when I say rarely works, I mean it never works. And when I say it never works, I mean it looks like you've color corrected them. You've just brightened them up. So we're going to do a patch, similar to how we did the laugh line. We're going to make a G mask for this area, and then we're going to take some skin from just below it, move it up. So we'll add ourselves an action. I think this will look familiar. I usually do 2 different gradients there, just so we get a softer bit down the bottom. We'll go ahead and do a planar track. Going nice and fast because we pre-rendered. Now I'm going to add an image from the background. Alt-G to connect. Invert the G mask. And take this image here and just move it up. Just like that. And of course, right out of the gate, it looks terrible. So let's fix that. First thing we're going to do, got to get into that habit, sorry. I've been a one viewport kind of guy for a very long time. Old habits, right? First thing we're going to do is we'll take the G mask here and we'll blur it. And then we're going to go ahead and make it really transparent. There it is, 100% transparent. And now, dial it back a bit. I find somewhere around 75 usually is a good place. Obviously, every shot's different. But what this has done here is it's filled in the dark circle or the eye bag here. It's filled it in with skin that has beautiful texture. We haven't made it go away. That would look ridiculous. That would look fake. Right? It would look plastic. No one looks like this. We've just taken the edge off. So now let's go ahead and just track the other side and do the same thing. We're going to avoid the nose at the beginning of our track, or when we do our track, and then we'll fix everything up later. All right, let's feather this guy out. More at the bottom than at the top. You know the drill. Add an image, Alt-G. Whoops. Alt-G, there we go. Double tap on the G mask, invert it. And now we'll raise this up. And we're going to have to slide it over a little bit because of that nose. But let's blur our mask. Make our image 75% transparent. See? All better. We do need to protect the nose. We're going to want to color correct the nose later, so maybe we'll, I was going to say kill two birds with one stone, but I can't find anything funny. So we'll go ahead and draw a mask around the nose. Track this guy. Tighten her up a little bit. And we'll just connect this to our second image. And you can see here, problem solved. The eyes have it. Let me go ahead and call this eye bags. And next up, we'll tackle the eyebrows. This is just going to be more patching like we've already done. We'll take a look at this one first. All right, so we've got two gaps right here that we want to fill. And then we have a little flyaway eyebrow hair here. So I'm going to go ahead and just get some tracking data out of the way. So I'll grab this part of the brow, go to track, and to tracker. That should be good. We'll do a little 1-point track backwards. All right, so that's all our tracking data. I'm just going to turn off rendering on this G mask so it doesn't affect anything. In fact, I can actually hide it because I'm not using it. So first things first, let's get rid of this, shall we? So I'll have this tracking axis. In fact, let's just call this tracking data. With that selected, I'm going to make a little mask here. And that should hold up fine. It does. Grab an image from the background. Disconnect, Alt-G to disconnect the G-mask link. Connect it here. Invert. And I'll just take this layer and slide it to the right. All right. Let's do one more, shall we? Maybe for right here. Again, with this selected, let's make a little mask. We're already tracked, which is delicious. Add another image. Alt-G. Invert the G mask. And drag to the right. There we go. It looks promising. Let me take my mask and blur it. Maybe I'll raise it up just a little bit, just so we don't have an exact duplicate of what's going on over here. Very good. And then finally, we'll make one more mask for this gap. And rinse and repeat. Whoops. And blur the mask a little. Voila. Cleaned up eyebrow. I wonder if the same tracking data will work. Let's see. Close enough. I'll turn on auto key and just do a little manual adjustment here. There we go. Let's take care of this dot. Blur the mask a little. There we go. And we're going to fill in this gap. Same technique. Tracking data selected. Space G. It's repetitive, but it can be quite soothing. All right, let me just make a little manual adjustment here. Okay, cool. There we go, Alt-G, invert the mask. Maybe we'll slide this over to the left. Let's see. This little luminance shift in the skin, but maybe when I blur the mask, yep, that blended away. Great. Eyebrows fixed. Okay, that just leaves us with the nose. The nose is a little red, so we're going to fix that. Go back to my eye bags action setup here, where I tracked the nose, or I masked for the nose. I will copy that. Add myself a little Gmask tracer node. Remember, Gmasks made in action are compatible with Gmasks in the Gmask tracer, so I'll trace that. We have a nose. Okay, and now I just want to suppress some red out. To do that, I'm going to use the old color warper and connect my Gmask tracer to the matte input. And now I'll change my mode here from warp to suppress, and then push this little color ball in the direction of the color I want to suppress, which is up, which is red. Right? Just a little bit. Let's try blurring the mask a little bit. See if that helps. Because right now I'm kind of feeling the hard edge of the discoloration, or of the color suppression rather. So let's blur our mask. Yep, that helped. Might bring this back a little bit. There we are. Simple as that. We made it a little less cold outside. And the final thing we want to do is fix this little bump in her nose. First, I'm going to save, increment and save, and then press Control S, because as I've said before, sometimes things crash. The simplest way to solve this problem is to actually stabilize this shot, so we can use an extended bicubic to simply smooth out the nose. So let me make myself a little bit more room. And I'm going to add a 2D transform node here. And go ahead and stabilize the nose. Just a 1-point stabilization is really all we need. In case you didn't know that, the tilde key enables or turns active on and off, and you can select your trackers with 1 and 2. Grab this little freckle right here and hit forward. So now our image is stabilized, or at least it's stabilized from this point here around the nose. As you can see, the stabilizer has created these little black bars all around the edges. That's just a byproduct of the image getting shifted around when you stabilize from a certain point or from a particular point. What we're going to do to solve that problem is over here under Canvas Resolution, we're going to change the option here from Same as Input to Auto Scale. And what that'll do is make the canvas big enough so that we never lose any of the information. None of the pixels ever get cropped off the edge. And we'll call this stab. And then we're just going to make a quick copy of it, put it over here, and click Invert Stabilization to unstabilize, or unstab. Only thing we have to do is reset the canvas resolution to match what it was before the stabilize, 2402 by 2160. Let me just put that in under User Defined, 2402 by 2160. And if we look here on the unstab, everything's back to where it needs to be. We're going to throw one more action in the middle here, which we will call rhinoplasty. And let's look at our nose. We're going to add an image and change it from a flat surface to an extended bicubic. And go to Vertices and hit Subdivide a couple of times. Now we're going to turn on Auto Adjust and change our cursor mode to Move UV/Vertex. And we will go ahead and move the control points here to line up better with the nose. In fact, I'm going to subdivide this one more time. There we go. If we scrub through, we can see that because we stabilized, her nose stays pretty much around where the controls of the extended bicubic are. So now I'll change my cursor mode back to Move and turn off Auto Adjust and go in and just adjust this control point here. See what's happening on this side? There we go. Simple as that. Scrub through. And our nose is straight. And that, my friends, is all there is to it. Here's our before and our after for our cleanup shot. So to review, we started out by creating a region of interest with this little resize node here to speed everything along. We then went in and used our little patching technique here to remove all kinds of blemishes. But really, what we did is we removed the major blemishes, the things that might still be visible if we just did A2 Beauty or something like it right at the beginning. But we also used the patching to clean up things like this little bump on the lip and this little scar on the side of the nose. We then took a look at a technique to smooth out or kind of decrease the intensity of laugh lines. We used Crok skin to fill in this blotchy area of her cheek. And then we also painted out a bunch of little flecks and took care of the whites of the eyes, got rid of used the paint node, used drag to get rid of the veins and red areas of the eyes. We then used motion vector tracking to put all that stuff on the image. After that, we used A2 Beauty to clean up the skin kind of overall. Oh, look at that. Look at that. I got to fix that. There's a little part of the nose that is being affected by A2 Beauty that I do not want to be affected by A2 Beauty. So let's grab our nose G mask here. Copy. Go back to our G masks that are defining the area for A2 Beauty, and we'll paste that in. And we just have to make sure that we change the color to, and we'll watch it happen live here, Change the color to 0. And I'm just going to move this out a little. Oh, actually, because we pre-rendered this, that's no good anymore. So let me connect this over here, connect the beauty marks to our eye bags so we can look at this live. There we go. And you can see that that is fixing the nose. Lovely. After that, we looked at cleaning up the bags under the eyes with another patch technique. We used the color warper to suppress the redness out of her nose. And then in between a stabilize and unstabilize, we used an extended bicubic to take care of the bump in the nose. And then finally, we pipe all this back into our little reposition action, which puts our region of interest back where it needs to be registered with the original background plate. Well, that's going to do it for this installment of Logik Academy on beauty. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed putting it together. If you have any questions, just hit me up on the forum at forum.logik.tv. And thank you as always for supporting Logik. We'll see you next time.